Children should have lots of opportunities to just play. But even young children have too few these days, particularly in school settings. These two propositions are indisputable and very, very important, but they're also very familiar. You've probably heard those sentiments expressed by now. I have some resources about the importance of play in the show notes to this episode. The second proposition reflects a kind of cult of rigor. The reason kids don't get a chance to play as much now has to do with corporate-style school reform, which has a devastating impact that you can map out horizontally in terms of test preparation, displacing more valuable activities at every age level, and vertically because of the pressures pushed down to the youngest grades, leading to developmentally inappropriate instruction and even preschool teachers being forced to sacrifice opportunities for imaginative play in favor of drilling kids on mastering a defined set of skills. As with anything that needs to be said and isn't being said enough, at least to the people in power, there's a temptation to just keep saying it. Play matters. Kids aren't getting enough play. But because we've been reminded of these things so often, today I want to offer 5 other propositions about play that are less obvious, or at least less frequently discussed. A careful look at less often understood aspects of children's play. Today on Cone Zone. I'm Alfie Kohn. Proposition number 1. Play is being sneakily redefined. Whenever an education concept attracts favorable attention, pretty soon its name is going to be invoked by people or by institutions, even when what they're really doing represents a diluted version of the original idea or even a distorted version of it. A lot that has been billed as progressive or authentic, balanced, developmental, student-centered, hands-on, differentiated instruction. What else? Discovery-based. Turns out to be pretty discouraging and discouragingly traditional when you see how people are using that language. The same thing is true of play. Quoting Ed Miller from the Alliance for Childhood, most of the activities set up in choice time or center time in early childhood classrooms and described as play by some teachers are in fact teacher-directed and involve little or no free play, imagination, or creativity. Around the same time that Miller said that, Elizabeth Grau, who's an early childhood professor at the University of Wisconsin, made a very similar observation. She said, what counts as play in many classrooms are highly controlled centers that focus on particular content labeled as choice, but that are really directed at capturing a specific content-based learning experience, such as number bingo or retelling a story exactly as the teacher told it on a flannel board. People may still talk about play, but it's really not play at all. By the way, we've seen this in other areas of education too. When whole language was big, the idea of kids having more choice about authentic, literacy-based instruction in reading and writing. A couple of big textbook companies decided, they put their finger to the wind and said, okay, we'll give you these big basils, these textbooks, and we'll call them whole language in a box. This is what's happening with play now. So just because people use the language of play or choice time with little kids doesn't mean that it's real play. Second proposition, play isn't just for young children. The concept of play is very closely related to ideas like imagination or inventiveness, the idea of asking what-if questions. It's very similar to Mahai Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow, the idea of very deep absorption in an activity where you lose track of time. In fact, you read virtually any account of creativity in the humanities or the sciences, and you come across these same ideas, the relevance of daydreaming, the importance of fooling around with possibilities, looking at one thing and seeing another, embracing the joy of pure discovery, So the argument isn't just, my God, we need to let little kids play so they'll be creative and inventive when they're older. Rather, it's that play should be part of a teenager's or an adult's life too. Proposition number 3. Play with little children can be set up in a cross-age way. Ideally, Peter Gray, a psychologist at Boston College, points out that older kids are uniquely able to provide support for younger kids. Some people would call it scaffolding in mixed-age play. Have older and younger kids play together on purpose. Don't just let it happen by accident occasionally. Sometimes older kids may do better than adults with little kids because they're closer to them in age. And also, as Gray points out, they don't see themselves as responsible for the younger children's long-term education, and therefore typically don't provide more information or boosts than the younger ones need. They don't become boring or condescending. That's the third idea. Not only is play an important concept for older people, but older kids should be with younger kids when the younger kids are playing, at least sometimes. Proposition number 4. The point of play is that it has no point. I think we need to be really careful that our justification for giving kids more time to play doesn't end up destroying what play means. So let's back up and ask, what does play mean? So maybe the first big book on the whole concept was by a Dutch historian named Johan Huizinga. He wrote a book called Homo Ludens, defining our species by its capacity for play. And he wasn't just talking about kids in this book. He defined play as, quote, a free activity standing quite consciously outside ordinary life as being not serious, but at the same time absorbing the player intensely and utterly, unquote. You play because it's fun, full stop. You don't play because you expect some instrumental advantage to come out of it. The point is not to perform well or to master a skill, though those things could happen. G.K. Chesterton had an aphorism that I've always loved, delightfully subversive. He said, if a thing is worth doing at all, it's worth doing badly. Isn't that terrific? The value of it comes from doing the thing itself. That's what defines pure play. It's not about doing it well. It's not even about learning from doing it. It's about process, not product. It has no goal other than itself. Among the external goals that are inconsistent with play is a deliberate effort to do something better or faster than somebody else. If you're keeping score, in fact, if you're competing at all, what you're doing is not play. John Dewey, if you've listened to a few of these episodes, you know I love to quote him just because so much of what he said was so prescient and so insightful. He said, play denotes the psychological attitude of the child, not anything which the child externally does. By the way, that's another example, one of many, of the limits of focusing on behavior that you can see and measure. It's the goals or lack of goals. It's the perspectives and experience of the situation that matter, in this case, to define play. Dewey continues, so any given or prescribed system or activities for promoting play should be viewed skeptically, lest these be inconsistent with the whole idea. A few years ago, I came across an article in the New York Times Sunday magazine written by Paul Tough, where I didn't know whether to laugh or shudder when I read this sentence. Kids need careful adult guidance and instruction before they are able to play in a productive way. But then when I thought about it and stopped shuddering or laughing, I forget which I ended up doing, I realized I tend to give in to this tendency too. I catch myself like trying to justify play in terms of its usefulness. This is a real problem because to insist on its benefits violates the spirit of play, if not the very meaning. Even the milder reassurances by some of us pro-play folks about its benefits ought to be, I think, viewed skeptically. We lament the diminishing opportunities for play, and then we defensively list the benefits of all the stuff kids will learn. Play is how kids learn to use language, how they learn to plan, how they acquire the ability to imagine the world from someone else's perspective. It teaches them fairness and conflict resolution. Play is children's work. But all of this is really troubling. Do we really think that play has to be justified by its outcomes? My friend Debbie Meyer, tongue firmly in cheek, once said, if we want to sell play to the people who decide how kids in school get to spend their time, we should get rid of the word and instead declare that kids need time for self-initiated cognitive activity. That's what it will take. Yeah, I understand this tendency to try to market it, to try to wrench back, to wrest back some of the time kids need to play. And we've got to sell people on it by saying, here's all the great things that kids will get out of it. The first problem with doing that is it is just not a good idea in the final analysis to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. This is something I've written about and spoken about other times, how it's really a bargain with the devil to try to defend pre-K education because it contributes to the economy in the long run, or to say you should teach music because that will help kids with their math skills or whatever. It ends up really being a problem because you end up doing that stuff differently because it's now been reframed as and justified as ways of achieving this advantage that's problematic. But the other reason this gives me pause is that there may be reason to doubt that play really does, in every case, achieve these advantages. A couple of researchers independently, Peter K. Smith and Angeline Lillard, published pieces where they found that there was some empirical reason to doubt the academic benefits that are so commonly attributed to play, or at least to suggest those benefits are overstated. So what if they're right? What if it's true? Would we then say that kids shouldn't be able to play, or they should have less time to do so? Or would we insist that play is intrinsically valuable? that it's not only defined by the absence of external goals for those who do it, but that it doesn't need external advantages in order for children to have the opportunity to do it. If that's how we would respond to that evidence, then we should be very careful about defending play based on the alleged payoffs. Proposition number 5. Play isn't the only alternative to work. I got to be honest, I have never been comfortable using work to describe the process by which children make sense of ideas. The metaphor of work comes from what adults do in factories and offices to earn money. And many people who I respect, including many Montessori educators, love to talk about the work of kids as a way of, I guess, imputing their activities with a certain gravitas and seriousness. But this is not the same thing. To say that we're going to defend play is not the same thing as saying that kids should spend all day playing. There is a third option, especially as kids get older, that what we're doing in school, what they're doing in school, is learning. The primary purpose of learning is neither play like enjoyment, although it can be deeply satisfying, nor is it the work-like completion of products, even though it can involve intense effort and concentration. It's not necessary to work in order to experience challenge or reach excellence. And it's not necessary to play in order to experience pleasure. Some years ago, I wrote a piece called Students Don't Work, They Learn, in which I drew from the work of the late Hermine Marshall, who taught in San Francisco and wrote, I think, very lucidly on this idea. Other people have thought about this too in different ways. Seymour Papert coined the phrase hard fun for what it can be like to construct meaning and have kids thoroughly engaged in what they're doing, where it's not defined by rigor and difficulty, but there is an element of real commitment to what they're doing, and it doesn't always come easily, but it's very deeply gratifying. So, obviously, there aren't a lot of people out there who are saying all learning should be like play, but there are a lot of people out there saying what kids do in school, the learning should be like work. And that's why I want to push back on this dichotomy to say work versus play is a false binary. The position is that learning isn't work, and it can be deeply satisfying. And there are a lot of people out there. In an earlier episode called Confusing Harder with Better, I talked about how much conservatives hate the idea of feel-good education. They're really suspicious if kids enjoy what they're doing at all. It has to be more work-like. So this last point about play and work not being the only possibilities is not a defense of play. It's a defense of learning as a separate and important category that's distinct from play, even though I guess I'm saying that the two share some important characteristics. This is separate from the larger point about the need for pure play, and I do want to come back to that finally, to underscore that even though many people have been saying it, boy, is it true, and not just for young children. Yes, early childhood educators know this, and they say it a lot, but the message still needs to get out to those who make policy. And so there's different ways of looking at play and the concept, different aspects of it, different defenses of it that may turn out to be problematic. But yes, the bottom line is kids need more of a chance than they're getting these days to just play just because they're kids.